Hallo, ich bin's, Robin, Deutschlehrer mit Core Languages, and today I'm walking around the streets of downtown Charleston, South Carolina. It's a hot and humid day because it's the middle of July. Let me make that sentence again. It's a hot and humid day because it's the middle of July. Now, if I were to dissect the sentence grammatically, I'd be able to identify that the sentence consists of two clauses: a main clause, it's a hot and humid day, and a subordinate clause or a dependent clause because it's the middle of July. The main clause can stand alone, the subordinate clause cannot. I put them together by using the word because. Because is a subordinating conjunction, which is like a little piece of glue or a bit of glue that helps me put those two clauses together. In German, we also have subordinating conjunction. Problem is, they change the word order. And not only do they change the word order, it becomes more complicated depending on where we put the subordinate clause. We can also start the sentence with a subordinate clause. Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to use subordinating conjunctions and subordinate clauses so that you can use them in your German sentences. I would say los geht's und viel Spaß beim Deutschlernen.
Subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions are words that link main clauses to subordinate clauses or Nebensätze. Subordinate clauses are dependent clauses, which means they cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. Subordinate clauses contain a subordinating conjunction, which in German change the word order in the subordinate clause. A subordinating conjunction can either be at the beginning of a sentence if the sentence begins with a subordinate clause, or they can appear after the main clause set off by a comma if the sentence begins with the main clause. Here are examples or Beispiele of subordinate clauses that follow a main clause. Sie geht ins Bett, weil sie müde ist. She goes to bed because she is tired. Wir wissen, dass Zusammenarbeit wichtig ist. We know that co-working is important. Ich komme in die Arbeit, sobald ich gegessen habe. I come to work as soon as I have eaten. We can also begin a sentence with a subordinate clause, but then we have to keep two things in mind. The first thing we have to keep in mind is that the word order is different in the subordinate clause because we are using a subordinating conjunction. The second thing we have to keep in mind is because we are putting an entire clause in position 1, now we also have to change the word order in the main clause. Watch what happens in the following examples. They are the same sentences as the previous slide, but here they begin with a subordinate clause. Weil sie müde ist, geht sie ins Bett. When we begin with a subordinate clause, we have the verb after the comma, or in second position in some ways, followed by the subject. It would be incorrect to say, weil sie müde ist, sie geht ins Bett. Dass Zusammenarbeit wichtig ist, wissen wir. That co-working is important, we know, or literally, know we. And sobald ich gegessen habe, komme ich in die Arbeit. As soon as I have eaten, come I to work, or I come to work. When forming a sentence with a main clause and a subordinate clause, keep the following things in mind. The main clause or the independent clause can stand alone or independently. The subordinate clause depends on the main clause and cannot stand alone, hence the name dependent clause. The subordinate clause will begin with a subordinating conjunction, which in German kicks the verb to the end of the clause. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that we can start a sentence with a subordinate clause, but then we also have to change the word order in the main clause. The subordinate clause will begin with a subordinating conjunction, then the subject, the predicate, and then the verb, which was kicked to the end of the clause by the subordinating conjunction. Then in the main clause, we start with the verb, then the subject, and then the predicate. In this example, we started with a subordinate clause and then the main clause. When we start with the main clause, we have the subject, then the verb, then the predicate. And then in the subordinate clause, we begin with a subordinating conjunction, the subject, the predicate, and then the verb that was kicked to the end of the clause by the subordinating conjunction. This is the main clause, and this is the subordinate clause. Here are some examples. Weil du gesund ist, siehst du gut aus. Because you're eating healthy, you look good. But I could also say, du siehst gut aus, weil du gesund ist. You look good because you're eating healthy. There are many one-word or multiple-word subordinating conjunctions or untergeordnete Konjunktionen. Remember that these can only be found at the beginning of a subordinate clause, and they will always kick the verb to the end of the clause. Feel free to read along. Here are one-word conjunctions and their English translations. Als, bis, bevor, da, damit, das, ehe, falls, indem, nachdem, ob, obgleich, obwohl, seitdem. Sobald, so oft, solange, während, weil, wenn, wenngleich. Here are some multiple word conjunctions. Als ob, als wenn, so dass, zu. Let's practice. Üben wir. Look at the following two pictures and sentences and try to choose the correct subordinating conjunction. Choose from seitdem, indem, nachdem, and damit. Die Studenten lernen jetzt, sie besser fürs Examen vorbereitet sind. The correct subordinating conjunction is damit. Die Studenten lernen jetzt, damit sie besser fürs Examen vorbereitet sind. The students are studying now so that they are better prepared for the exam. Notice that the verb sind was kicked to the end of the subordinate clause by damit. Sie hat eine Pause gemacht, sie halbwegs da war. The correct conjunction is nachdem. Sie hat eine Pause gemacht, nachdem sie halbwegs da war. She has paused or she has made a pause after she was halfway there. Again, notice that the verb war was kicked to the end of the subordinate clause by nachdem. How about this example? This sentence begins with a subordinate clause, and notice how the verb fahre was kicked to the end. And then also notice that the word order in the main clause is different. Bevor ich zur Arbeit fahre or als ich zur Arbeit fahre muss ich frühstücken? The correct sentence is bevor. Bevor ich zur Arbeit fahre, muss ich frühstücken. Before I drive to work, I must eat breakfast. How about this example? Wir können schwimmen, obwohl es genug Zeit gibt or solange es genug Zeit gibt. The correct sentence is wir können schwimmen, solange es genug Zeit gibt. We can swim as long as there is enough time. How about this example? This sentence begins with a subordinate clause, so pay attention to the word order both in the subordinate clause and the main clause. Seitdem or so oft er kochen gelernt hat, machen wir lieber zu Hause Abendessen. The correct word is seitdem. Seitdem er kochen gelernt hat, machen wir lieber zu Hause Abendessen. Ever since he learned how to cook, or ever since he learned cooking, we prefer making dinner at home. And how about this example? Dass du beim Supermarkt bist, or da du beim Supermarkt bist, könntest du Tomatensauce kaufen. The correct sentence is, da du beim Supermarkt bist, könntest du Tomatensauce kaufen. Because you are at the supermarket, or as you are at the supermarket, could you buy tomato sauce?
Vielen Dank fürs Zusehen. I hope you now have a better understanding of how to use subordinating conjunctions in German. As always, if you have more questions, feel free to comment, or if you're interested in joining one of our German courses with a live instructor, feel free to message us directly. Das war's, vielen Dank und bis zum nächsten Mal.